Our next guest is Perry King, and I'm sure that you all recognize him from Captains and Kings, and he's been on Riptide. You were a co-star, and Almost Home, and just some fabulous work. We are so delighted to have you with us for the first time.
I'm really pleased to be here. Really pleased. This is a place I've loved for decades, and I'm so thrilled that I somehow managed to stumble into being part of this festival now.
Now, you're from the East Coast, and you studied at Juilliard?
I did, yeah, and Yale.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you start on the stage there on the East Coast, or?
Yeah, I've done a lot of stage. I think at this point I've done something like 50 movies and probably about the same number of pieces of theater, plays and stuff. But, you know, I was thinking before I came here just recently that the real reason I wanted to be an actor, and that's all I ever wanted to be, I think every actor will tell us the same story. It's just from the moment I thought about what I'd do with my life, I wanted to be an actor. But the reason was because of the Westerns that I saw as a little kid. That's what I really wanted to do, was to be a cowboy star. I'd watch all the Westerns that were made right here when I was a little boy, and I thought, that's what I want to do, you know? I want to do what those guys are doing. But I've never been able to get into Westerns. I look so patrician. I'm, you know, from a New England family that got here on one of the first boats. And I just looked that way. And so what I always end up playing, and the older I get, the more this is true, I end up playing, you know, the jerk Donald Trump, cold-hearted businessman that everybody hates, that ruins everyone's life. And that's all right. I'm not complaining. I'm very, very lucky as an actor. I've made my living for 40 years as an actor, and I'm grateful for it. But I never got to do Westerns. One time I got to do one Western, something called The Cowboy and the Movie Star. And a modern Western with Sean Young.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, yeah.
Good
It was actress.
Oh, wonderful actor. And a wonderful lady. One of the best people I've ever worked with. I mean, there you go. That's a good story right in itself about show business, because Sean has this terrible reputation. I don't know whether you know it, but she's got this reputation of being a horrible person and a horrible person to work with. And it's all a fabrication. It was literally done to her by an actor whose name I don't want to mention because I hate knocking people, who did this to hurt her. Oh. And it pains her because she's not that at all. She's terrific, a complete pro and a wonderful person. But oddly enough, that reputation is maybe the best thing that ever happened to her, because it separates her, it makes her special. People remember her, and you know, it's that old story. There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yeah.
Whatever keeps your name in front of the audience. So.
Oh, show business can be very strange at times.
Sure can, most of the time. But anyway, I never got to be the cowboy I meant to be. Yeah. But that's okay. I still watch them any chance I get.
Well, with doing stage and film and TV, what's your favorite?
Well, I guess the main thing is that the older I get, the less I like to do theater, because it's really hard work. That's the work, you know. And making film is, frankly, a lot easier. You know, you work hard for 20 minutes or half an hour, and then you sit in a chair for 45 minutes while they get the next one ready, and you take a breather. On stage, there's no breathing. On stage, it's 100%. I was in A Few Good Men on Broadway about 10 years ago or so, and I was playing the part that Jack Nicholson played in the film, Nathan Jessup, the Colonel, the bad guy. Although it's a much more complicated play than it is a movie, so he isn't really a bad guy. But on Saturday, when we did 2 shows, the only way I could get through the second show was to go out and have a huge steak between them. I mean, it was like filling up my gas tank. It's exhausting being on stage. Very satisfying, exciting, but exhausting. Yeah. And pretty much ruins your personal life, because you don't relax until 4 in the morning, enough to go to sleep, and by the time you wake up again, and it's almost noon, and you got to go to work very soon, and so it just absorbs your life. Whereas film is a much more civilized way to make a living and be an actor. So, you know, stage is more exciting, but I guess the older I get, the more I like doing film, because it's an easier job.
With the crews that you've worked with, as I said, with film, the Choir Boys and the Lords of Flatbush, I mean, those became almost iconic, especially Lords of Flatbush.
Yeah.
And then the great TV series, because you worked on so many of my absolute favorites of all times, Cannon, and I just loved him. What was your favorite crew? Did you have a favorite crew to work with, or?
Well, I did a lot of miniseries for Universal in the 70s, very early 80s. For example, I did one, maybe people remember this one, called The Last Convertible. You guys remember that one? Yeah. And the Universal crews and and that whole production company of Roy Huggins was great man, absolutely. And the backlot of Universal back then in the 70s, for example, very different than it is today. Today it's an amusement park. Back then it was a real working lot, and if you were working there, if I was doing a miniseries, they'd give me one of those little rooms that everybody got to, if you were exhausted, you could sleep in the room and stuff. So anyway, one of the great joys of my career was doing something called Captains and the Kings, a miniseries in the late 70s, I think it was. And Doug Hayes wrote and directed that, and he was writing it while he was directing it. He'd be writing the next episodes. It was a 10-hour piece. It's such a shame that miniseries have disappeared.
Oh, I loved that genre.
Well, they're a big story. You can tell a 10-hour movie or a 15-hour movie, but it has a beginning and an end. The trouble with series always is that you can't ever tell the beginning or the end. With series, you're stuck telling the middle of the story every week, because you got to keep it going. But with a miniseries, you had the right to tell a huge story that you could never put into a feature. It's such a shame. They never made money, I guess, not much, and so they phased them out, and television is bankrupt almost, at least network TV now. So.
Well, I mean, there's not very much that's worth looking at. I hate reality series. They couldn't pay me to watch them.
Right. Well, reality, in TV terms, the translation of that word means cheap.
Exactly.
That's why they do them. It has nothing to do. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
pay everybody
cheap,
enough to buy a peanut butter sandwich.
Still a script.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, there's some good stuff on the cable stations. I'm working on Big Love right now, which is a show on
Love
HBO.
That. I live in Utah.
Do you?
I do.
Oh, well, that series. Now that's a great show too. That's where I think television is living right now. Is on those cable stations, Showtime and HBO. Sure. Some of the best TV ever made is on those things.
Yeah. Well, and some of the others, TNT
Deadwood.
and USA.
Deadwood.
Oh, Deadwood was great.
Boy.
But they're doing 6 episodes at a time,
yeah.
so they can afford to do them and keep doing them. I love it. I think it's really great. You did one series that was really more of a soap than anything else, Melrose Place. What was that like doing?
Yeah, I enjoyed Melrose. That was Aaron Spelling, and that was the best part of Melrose Place. I worked a lot for Aaron Spelling, and he was the greatest guy in the world. He had been an actor, so he liked actors, which is very unusual among producers to like actors.
Yeah.
And you can't really blame producers, really, because actors can be a pain in the butt. But Aaron loved actors. He would listen to your ideas. He knew you just were trying to make it better. He always made it an enjoyable experience working for him. The show, Melrose, was, a good show. It was enjoyable for the audience. Yeah. It was kind of a factory for the people who worked on it. You'd come in and you'd go to work, and they had it down to such a science that, boy, you better get it right in the first take, because if the words were right, they printed it and they moved on. You'd come to work and they'd say, "Okay, we're going to wrap at 5:17," and you think, how would they know that? I mean, boy, 5:17, they were finished. They were out of there. They knew what they were doing.
Well, as a group, they'd been working together for so long. Now, where did you come into that?
Well, let's see. I was one of the dysfunctional parents on that show, basically, and I ended up drowning to death. And there was a scene where you saw me dead. They built the set of a morgue, and I had to lie in one of those things that they pull out of the wall, and as it would come out, I knew it missed my nose by about 1 millimeter, and it was very disturbing doing that scene. Very disturbing. I'll tell you another funny thing about Melrose Place was that every camera on a set always has something called the front box, and the front box holds a few instruments for the camera assistant and stuff, but it also often holds gum and things like that, if somebody wants them. On Melrose Place, it held breath mints and Banaka and things like that, because the whole show was about you either were fighting with somebody or kissing them. That's what you did on Melrose Place. So So at Melrose Place, there was constantly mints in the front box so that before a kissing scene, everybody would spray them up, try and spruce themselves up a little bit so they wouldn't offend each other.
What was it like working on Spin City? I love Michael J.
That
Fox.
That was a lot of fun. That was funny. Every day was really funny. Of course, I know Michael Fox from many years ago, a movie called Search and Destroy. One of the first things he ever did that I did in the early 80s. But when I did it, it was Charlie Sheen. He'd taken over by then. And and it was good. And Heather Locklear, who is terrific.
That's
wonderful to work with. One of the
lady.
best people in the business. Yeah. Gorgeous and sexy, but the best part of Heather Locklear is what a sweetheart to work with she is. Just
nice.
A professional, wants to have fun and get it done, and none of that, princess stuff at all.
I love hearing about that.
Like Sean Young, same thing.
Yeah. I mean, you hear so many bad things, and all the time, since I grew up in the business, people are always coming up and they're saying, they don't make people like they used to. I said, of course they do. It's just that the nice ones aren't in these rags at the checkout stand all
That's
the time.
probably true, yeah.
Yeah,
Tell you, it's like Bill Paxton on HBO, on Big Love. And all those ladies that work on Big Love with him, those are wonderful people too. I agree with you. There's plenty of great people. It's just that the ones you hear about are the troublemakers and the people that take their press seriously, which is always an error. Yeah. I'm sure your parents didn't do that. They knew they were just good working people.
Yeah, well, they were lucky they didn't make it early. They both were well into their mid-late 20s. Mom had been a band singer, Dad on radio for years. So they weren't kids. And I think that's really hard when you're really young and all of a sudden make it big.
I agree.
That's hard to deal with.
Particularly when you're a kid.
Yeah.
I've known several actors who were child stars, and they've suffered hugely from it.
Yeah, with Michael Fox, I'm glad that, hear good things.
Oh,
because
yeah, he's a good guy, too.
I love watching his work.
Yeah.
So sad.
But Natalie Wood was a friend of mine many years ago. And
I grew up with her.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's a lady that suffered greatly from being a child actress and being a star her whole life. But by the time I knew her, which is close to the end of her life, she was terrific. She solved any problem she had.
Yeah, well,
she was one of the most enthusiastic people I've ever known.
She was terrific as a teenager. I mean, I was just wild about her. And we spent quite a bit of time together before she made it really big, and then a little bit after. And I thought she was a great lady. I really liked her.
Well, see, I knew her later, so I'm glad to hear that earlier on she was like that, too.
Oh, she was. I mean, she was a super kid, and she'd been so huge as a child. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's very hard for child actors.
I do, too. I've known so many that never did solve that problem of losing, because they lose their childhood. They don't get a chance to be a kid, and there's no going back to it. And another thing that happens to child actors so often is, and this, I think Natalie fought with this, she struggled with this a lot, was what you learn that works for you when you're a kid doesn't work when you grow up. So you've got to redefine yourself in your own mind more than anywhere else and unload all those techniques that worked when you were a kid and start over, and it's almost impossible to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you came sort of the long way, going to Yale and then to Juilliard and perfecting.
Yeah, but I never worked as a kid. I mean, I worked as a kid in high school and, as an amateur, but I didn't have that experience of learning a technique when I was a kid and using it and then discovering that when I grew up it didn't work anymore.
Did you have any funny experiences with crews while you were working?
Funny experiences with crews? I don't know. I've had a million of them. I'd have to. I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is I was doing right after I got to Hollywood in the early '70s. I was doing a Hawaii 5-0. Actually, that's one of the other westerns I guess I've done because it was on the Big Island and it was with Leslie Nielsen. He was playing my father, and Bruce Boxleitner, whom I'm sure you know. He's a western.
Well.
And we were running a cattle ranch in Hawaii, and I forget what the story was, but it had something to do with me causing trouble. And there was a scene where I was supposed to ride out ahead of all these cowboys and race across this thing, and they gave me just a old nag, that and one of those horses that wants to be at the back of the pack. And I was just kicking him and urging him on and trying so hard to get him to go somewhere, and he wouldn't. And so the next day I came in and I put spurs on. I hadn't had him on the first day, and I thought, this guy's going to go today, because I was supposed to be in the lead of this stuff, and the director was saying, Perry, God damn it, get to the front, what are you doing? Yeah. Well, overnight, the wranglers went out and found a horse that looked exactly the same, that was an ex-racehorse, right? And I hop on this guy, and it's ready to shoot, and he says, okay, action, and I just got ready to just touch it with the spurs, and this horse was like shot out of a cannon, flying across this field, way out in front of everybody else, completely out of control. I remember we were flying toward a bunch of sort of rock outcroppings, low rock stuff, yeah. And he was going so fast, I thought, well, I must see him. I don't want to mess with him and try to pull his head around and avoid these things. He went right over him with sparks flying off his shoes. And when I finally reined him in, we came in a big, reined him up, where he's up on his rear feet and prancing, and the director said, what are you trying to do now, show off? What's the matter? The wranglers are laughing like crazy. Lucky they didn't kill me. Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Lucky I can ride.
Oh,
anyway.
That's a problem, yeah.
So I took my spurs off.
Well, and of course, directors have, so many of them have never been on a horse. They have no idea what you're doing. Yeah. It's time that we ask our audience if they have some questions. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Perry, do you prefer TV over movies?
Well, everything has its good points and its bad points. The thing about a movie, particularly a big feature, is that you spend a lot of time doing it, so you get it really right. But sometimes the amount of time you spend on stuff seems excessive to me. One of the things I like about television is that it's down and dirty. Particularly when you're doing a series, you get in there and you get it and you get out. And sometimes it's better than it ever would have been otherwise because of that. Sometimes, of course, it's terrible. And either way, they print it and move on, so, because it costs a lot.
I could be wrong, but I seem to remember seeing you in a TV movie where you were interested in your daughter's roommate.
In my daughter's roommate? Huh.
Was that you?
Could have been. Sounds like me. No, I don't remember. Was it Tracy Gold? Is that right? I think I did a TV movie where my daughter's roommate is played by Tracy Gold, and she turns out to be crazy, and she tries to kill me or somebody else, and something like that. At this point, honestly, and again, I'm not complaining. I'm very lucky and I'm very grateful, but I've done so many things on film that it all becomes one big movie in my head. It's like one complicated movie, and it's hard for me to split them apart and think of them as individual movies.
Anybody else with a question? Yes.
Yeah.
Way in the back.
I remember you in the last Convertible. This goes back quite a few years. I thought it was a marvelous, marvelous series. The book was excellent, and I thought it was converted into a miniseries extremely well. I wonder if you have any comments, and I know it's going back quite a few years.
Well, that was one of those shows, it doesn't happen that often, but sometimes you do a show that really changes your life. You really feel it's so satisfying, so absorbing, and the part and the other characters so absorbing that it actually affects your life and teaches you things. And that's the way I feel about that. I still know most of the cast members from that show. We're still good friends. We feel very much, all of us, like, it was about a group of kids in college right during World War II, right when it happens, and that generation. And we all feel, to an amazing degree, as if we really lived that life. It isn't like we shot a story or played a part or pretended. To a large extent, we feel like we lived it, and all the characters were going through a lot of turmoil. And all of the actors in that film, for whatever reason, went through a tremendous amount of turmoil too. A lot of personal upheaval in our lives as well as the lives of the characters. So it's one of those rare things that I shot that really changed me and changed my life and feels like part of my life. Another one is The Lords of Flatbush. That film just made me a different person. I feel to a large extent like I became the guy in that movie. It happens sometimes. It's really interesting when that happens. Or the one I mentioned to you, the Cowboy and the Movie Star, was about a man who was losing his ranch because of a divorce and fighting to save it and didn't want to lose it. And a lady comes into his life, Sean Young, who helps him save it, basically. And within half a year of telling that story on film, I was about to lose my own ranch up north in the Sierra Nevadas that through a divorce, and I was fighting to save it, and I did. I became that guy. It was so interesting. I ended up with a cattle ranch, I think, because of that character. And I do in Gold Country. I have a cattle ranch that I spend a lot of time on, and it's because of that character.
So even though you haven't made lots of Westerns, you get to cowboy in real life.
I do, yeah.
That's
great.
Really
true. I do.
Now, there was another question here.
Yes, I'm listening to your voice. When you close your eyes, have you done a lot of any or none, whatever, voiceover or narration work?
Very little. And it's odd. People often say that to me. I think my voice, all the stage really helps your voice. It's like singing, doing words, doing speeches on stage is very similar to singing, and it develops your voice. But for some reason, I've never done much voiceover. The main thing I've done is I've worked for National Public Radio a few times, and I got to play Han Solo in the radio production of Star Wars. We did all three of those early movies on radio, which sounds like it doesn't make any sense at all when you think about it, but I'm telling you, it was done beautifully and very satisfying. And Lucas gave National Public Radio the rights to those movies for $1, I think it was, because he said that it bothered him to think that there were kids out there that couldn't afford to see those movies. So he wanted them to have access to those movies in some way without having to pay for it. So...
well, and radio's wonderful.
Oh, radio. Radio is the best acting there is, the best, because, first of all, it doesn't matter what you look like. You don't have to worry about all that makeup and all those silly things, and you don't have to worry about marks and lights, and there's only one technique in radio, and that's learning how to turn pages silently. And you can learn that in about 5 minutes. And the rest of it is just the pure pleasure of acting. You don't even have to learn the lines, You just have to figure out what to do with them, which is the fun.
Oh, that's great, because I don't hear that many actors now that have that great radio experience and all. And I thought that was a wonderful
Radio's
medium.
great training, you're right. It's wonderful training for acting. And the other thing that we miss today, and I really think this is the reason why, and I include myself with this very much, why American acting is really not up to the level it used to be back when your parents were working. And that was a golden time, we all agree, and I think it's partly radio, but mostly vaudeville.
Yeah.
All those great people that we love so much, they came out of vaudeville. Vaudeville was an incredible training area, training ground. You'd do 5 shows a day, and if you weren't good, they threw stuff at you.
Yeah.
So you learned really fast how to be good. You learned how to be funny if you had to be funny, and sad if you had to, it was amazing training. And all those great actors in the 30s and 40s, they came out, almost without exception, they came out of vaudeville. Look at Cary Grant, for example. Now, we think, Cary Grant, he was just Cary Grant, he was good looking. Cary Grant, in his heyday, was the best at comedy, the best at melodrama, and the best at romance. That would be as if Jim Carrey was just as good as Clint Eastwood and just as, it just doesn't happen today. But he learned how to do that from vaudeville when he was a kid. All those, Fred Astaire.
Oh, yeah.
If he didn't dance well, they threw stuff at him. Imagine.
I loved Cary Grant's comedy.
Yeah. Bring Up Baby.
Yeah, well, that and Father Goose, and his timing.
And Arsenic and Old Lace.
Yeah, oh.
That's one of the funniest things ever done in the history of the world. You cry when you watch that movie. And imagine, that guy would then go on after that and do a movie where he was the most romantic man in the world. Yeah. And yet we all think, he's just Cary Grant. The truth is, he was so good that he made it look easy. That's the people that are really good. The ones that make it look, you think, I could do that. Those are the ones that are so skillful. Mm-hmm. The ones that make it look like it's work, they're not so good.
Well, and darn it, the ones that make it look so easy and natural, they're not the ones that get the awards.
No,
and yet,
it's true.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
They are the best.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? Yes, ma'am.
Are you in contact with any of the people that you grew up with, like from grammar school on up, that sort of thing?
Yeah, a few. Just a few. What were you thinking? Why? I'm curious why you asked me that.
So frequently, you will see an article in the paper or learn of a celebrity or a great actor, and I'm not sure that those are necessarily the same thing, but having been always in touch with somebody that they were in high school with.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, I do have a few friends that go way back. Yeah. In fact, one friend that I counted among my best friends is a boy. He and I were friends when we were about 6. I mean, I still go back to my hometown in Ohio. Still do business with people in that town that my father did business with. I run my whole extended family's books and accounts and investments and stuff, and I do it through the firm that my father worked with in Ohio. Yeah, I see what you mean. I love those contacts with the past very much.
Well, and so often I think our old and dear tried and true friends, they keep us grounded too, as we do things later in life that are more successful or whatever. You don't have to wonder if they're there because of celebrity or anything else. They're there because you've known them forever.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the best.
Yes.
And I want to thank you for being with
thank you.
us.
It's a
you
pleasure
are
to
a
be here.
delight to talk
Thank you.
with.
Thank you.